Welcome, everybody. We happy to be here? Are we awake? Okay. Welcome to Resilient 2023. I have an amazing honor today. I get to introduce somebody who I don't usually get to say it, but he doesn't really need an introduction. If you've read science fiction, you've probably read David Brin. Lately, I've noticed if you're on TV or watching TV or Twitter or these things, you're probably running into David Brin. He's a physicist. He's a science fiction writer. He's helped change our culture. He's taken on things like helping write for Isaac Asimov after he died. And I think he's also really wise and a beacon for us to look maybe to in a time that's tough. And so we asked David here. I'm going to tell a little story. So Don Norman and Eli walked into a bar. In that bar was David Brin, and he was there to meet us. But he wasn't sure why, and this was like almost 10 years ago. And he goes, so why am I here? And we actually had an answer. We said, well, David, you wrote a book called Earth. And it's a fictional book in the near future about a planet full of humans that's nearly screwed itself. Hasn't made all the right decisions, maybe some poor decisions. And at the end of the book, they figure out how not to all die. And do you want to write the nonfiction version of that with us? And David's response was like, oh, shit. And it wasn't a no, but it was he does keep answering my phone calls at least. I am incredibly honored to have David here today. I want to speak less so he can speak more. I hope you pay attention, and I'm really happy to have you here, David Brin. Everybody, welcome.
Hello. I came here when this building was being built. I gave the dedication speech to that building over there. And it was such a great idea to see these labs, and now to come back and see these labs filled with design students learning how to scope out, how to turn challenges into something practical. And of course, it's all going to change because of AI. You're living in that generation where it's all going to change. And so let's dive in, because that's going to be one of the topics. Resilience in design is the general title. But of course, my main job is to give you contexts that you hadn't thought of. If any of you in back would like a closer view of the screen, you are welcome up here. And there's no reason to feel embarrassed if you want to just wander up and get closer so you can actually see. But it's up to you. In any event, some of you will be wondering about what that zero is doing in front of the year 2023, and you can ask about that during questions. I'll try to get to questions. Okay, well, these are some of my books. The one in the upper left became that movie that you see in the lower right before many of you were born. Kevin Costner had one of the most epic fails in the history of movie scheduling. He brought it out opposite Titanic. Now what? Okay, in any event, I do nonfiction as well, and there's my latest, which is nonfiction, which is called Vivid Tomorrows, Science Fiction in Hollywood, and it's about how, among other things, we all probably exist on this world today thanks to science fiction, especially movie science fiction, having warned us with self-preventing prophecies about all sorts of dangers. But we're going to try to do some of that today. And the one that Eli was talking about is my novel Earth in the upper left. And it's on a whole lot of lists of top 10 predictive novels that show a future that eventually large parts of it came to pass. Okay, so we have a lot of ambitions. We want to do many great things, but also we have a lot of problems. Even though poverty as a percentage of the human population is at its lowest point in the history of the world, 95% of human children go to school and have never starved. the media rightfully informs us of what a terrible moral fault we have for allowing any to exist. This slide was made before COVID, but it wasn't hard to predict that something was going to come. And of course, the problems of social unrest and the possibility that if wealth disparities continue to increase the way they are, of revolution. And of course, nature could reach out and smack us. So, we have a lot of ways in which we need to figure out how to be better. Now, it's very important that we recognize the one set of organs that we have that animals don't have. No other animal on the planet has what are called the prefrontal lobes, these little nubs just above the eyes. And there's a biblical reference to Moses having lamps on his brow. And that's a good metaphor for this is Michelangelo's statue of Moses, by the way, one of the greatest artworks in the world. And he's shown with horns on his brow because they mistranslated lamps as horns. They couldn't figure out what that could mean, lamps on the brow. Well, the prefrontal lobes are the lamps that let us peer ahead into the future. They're why you think about what might happen tomorrow. What might happen if I wore these clothes tomorrow? What would happen if I raised this at the meeting tomorrow? What might happen if I try to run this yellow light? And generally, it's very important to run these thought experiments, or as Einstein called them, Gedanken experiments, so that you can personally avoid a lot of mistakes. And ladies, you have no idea how many times males imagine things that they might do and then say, no, no. And that's what living in a male head is like. But these prefrontal lobes are also how we project ourselves not only into the future, but also imagine, what is it like to be that person? What could that person be thinking? And that leads to empathy. So these are very important nubs above the eyes. There used to be a procedure called a prefrontal lobotomy. They would go in behind the eye and cut the prefrontal lobes. And it helped a few people who were having severe problems, but they lost interest in the future. They remained intelligent, but they did not think about the future, which is why I'd rather have a free bottle in front of me than a prefrontal lobotomy. Sorry. Okay, so in any event, anticipation is what we do. And it's especially why I give this talk this portion of the talk to some of our intelligence agencies, because it's their job to try to anticipate problems. But we can't always anticipate problems. Often they take us by surprise. And that's why we have to nurture the topic of this class, which is resilience. Resilience is the partner of anticipation. You anticipate some problems, you try to deal with them in advance, and then you have a wide stance so that you're prepared for when surprise happens, for when you are taken by surprise. And if we have a society with a wide stance, then we can proceed. Okay, let's see. All right, so here's, it has a fairly short sleep mode. All right, so the question of whether or not our civilization can survive is discussed in a very good book by UCLA professor Jared Diamond called Collapse. It was brought up earlier by Arnold Toynbee, and they came up with lists of ways in which past civilizations failed. And that list includes natural calamities, ecological suicide by destroying, for instance, ancient peoples had irrigation that then turned their fields into deserts through salt accumulation. They didn't know. Enemies and war, of course, have brought down societies. Societal meltdown hurts right now because that's one of the ways in which our enemies are trying to bring us down right now, is by spurring societal meltdown. The feudal attractor state. 99% of our ancestors lived in feudal societies, pyramids of power, dominated by strong males. And it resulted in stupidity in governance, in all cases. Sometimes less than others, less stupidity, sometimes a little smarter. But it was always a bad idea, but it's trying to come back and then being outcompeted by other societies. There are other ways in which we might fail that we're inventing. And this includes information, AI, augmentation approaches that might change everything. The Anthropocene is the name for a new geological era when we might kill the planet. Deadly innovations, bio, nano, cyber, nuclear, some only exist yet in science fiction. Or the opposite problem, renunciation. The notion that many people in our society want to renounce further progress, renounce moving ahead into a further scientific technological world. And of course, this would be an absolute disaster given the incompleteness of our technologies, which are responsible for why 95% of children have full bellies and go to school on this planet. So, and there's rigid overdependence on fragile systems. Now, there are two concepts that I want you to think about offline because I don't have the time to get into them, but they are two that bookend this concept, and they are about the basic fundamentals of our problem. One is called the singularity. Look it up, find out about it. And that is the notion that everything is going to change because of technological advances like AI. Within the next 10 to 15 to 20 years, it might happen. And some, like Ray Kurzweil, think that it's going to make us gods very soon, and others think that the singularity doesn't need us and will proceed without organic humans. Look it up, you'll see there's a variety of thoughts about it. But the Fermi paradox is the other thing to think about, and that is why we have seen no signs of aliens. Now, nobody's talked or thought about aliens more from every different angle than I have, from SETI and astrophysics to science fiction. And I am notorious in saying, please stop bothering us with these manias, these UFO manias that have happened all my life, twice per decade, and never come up with a darn thing. The universe is interesting. Somebody may be out there, but there's a real problem, and we need to be mature about thinking about it and not just going, twice per decade. Okay, so there are crises that are provoked by technology. The first really modern crisis was propelled by Gutenberg's inventing of the printing press, which vastly expanded the amount of knowledge that human beings, normal human beings, not kings and high priests, because they had scribes before that, but normal human beings could keep outside their skull. And so you could have an encyclopedia and all that. Well, this led to people picking up books and realizing they couldn't read them because they were blind. So it increased a huge demand for glass lenses, for spectacles, which led immediately to the telescope and the microscope and bursts of science that were then shared through printing presses. Now, always there are optimists who say this is going to have incredible positive effects. It's going to make people better. And there are always pessimists who say this new system is going to overwhelm people with all the information. People won't be able to cope with the fire hose. It has got to be controlled. The information flows have got to be controlled. And always the pessimists were right first. The first product of the Gutenberg printing press in large quantities, rather than the Gutenberg Bible and all that, were horrible pamphlets. Catholics spreading horrible things about Protestants, Protestants saying horrible things about Catholics, making the religious wars of Europe vastly worse. But within a few decades, the positive effects were starting to show. People were reading books about faraway places. They were spreading their sense of inclusion wider than it had been before. So in each case, Each generation faces an augmentation of human memory. You can now remember things that you don't keep inside your skull in books. It augments vision. Glass lenses augment vision, and then perspective augments attention. And the 18th century, mass literacy expanded memory, printed illustration, let you imagine or see things far away. Science and democracy expanded attention, and each time they caused these crises. And each time we managed to get past the crisis and turn the new technology into a benefit. In the 1930s, radios and loudspeakers were the new tech for information. And we almost all died because of their ill effects when they were misused by horrible monsters who were really good at the use of radio and loudspeakers. And the main thing that saved us was the fact that in the English-speaking world, the people who were skilled at these new techniques, who took power, were on our side. So we lucked out. But we barely survived that one. 1950s television, I'm willing to argue that it did more good than harm straight from the start. Okay, so where are we going here? It has a very, all right, so here you have more crises. We're entering into the knowledge mesh, omnivalence, visualization, and simulation. These all expand memory, vision, and attention. And so far, if you talk to parents of kids who are addicted to video games, because Las Vegas is in that game, they love to study addiction. Well, I won't. But in any event, what's next? Artificial intelligence, augmentation. Okay. I was asked to talk about resilience. So here's down that paper in the lower right-hand corner. Your professors, Eli and others, will be able to give you these links. But I've consulted with a number of agencies, and it's really hard to get them to take this seriously. The electrical grid is fragile, although we're learning from the Ukraine war that it's not as fragile as we thought it was, because there's no doubt that Putin has ordered all sorts of attacks on our infrastructure. And apparently they failed. But who knows about next week? The long-range solution, of course, is more resilient, more robust distribution of power generation and power sharing systems. Okay, most rooftop solar systems will fail in a blackout just when they're needed most. Did you know that? If there's a blackout, your solar system, unless you have a battery system, will cut out because the power company doesn't want your solar system putting voltage into the wires while crews are out there trying to restore power. It's an incredibly stupid system. They could install for $20 a switch that would, when the power is out, instead send your solar power to one plug in your house so you could run your refrigerator and your rechargers. And the arrival of batteries means that wall batteries means about a quarter of the homes in America now can be what they're supposed to be. But nobody has paid any attention to this legislatively to demand that the retrofit be done so that the 5 million American homes out there would be beacons of light and power if there's ever a disaster. Another is the cell phone networks. They all will fail in disaster. All disasters, the cell phone networks fail. I gave this talk 15, 20 years ago. Qualcomm eventually started working on something that also Apple is, and they're trying to develop systems to so that your cell phone is powerful enough to get to a satellite. Well, you know, that sounds okay, but there's a much easier solution, and that is peer-to-peer text passing. When there's no cell tower within reach, then if you text somebody, and somebody's walking by, they can pick up your text and pass it along until it reaches a place with a cell tower. And then it goes out there and to its destination. Almost zero computational or energy power required. This poor woman was found in a basement in Fukushima, Japan, with dozens of outgoing texts on her phone. People were walking by, people were driving by. And then using your cell phones as a distributed data network. Not just for the government, but for distributions of just people. NGOs and all of that sort of thing. The Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination ran for the X Prize Foundation, the Tricorder X Prize, which was to develop little things that could be attached to your cell phone that would let you do physiological and medical checks on each other, or perhaps to check to see whether this puddle that is suspicious in your neighborhood contains toxic waste or something like that. Imagine, 200 million citizens being able to be part of a network that would keep track of things. Okay, got to really move along. All sky awareness is something which we could possibly, it's coming. There's a lot more awareness of what's going on in the sky than when I first started talking about this. There's a lot of distributed government networks, and it's considered to be a defense thing. And maybe we can get the UFO folks to participate. One of the questions I ask about these UFO things is, I've seen these manias ever since the late 1950s, ever since Sputnik. And there are now, by estimate, 10 million times as many cameras on Earth. Not 10 million more. 10 million times as many active cameras on the surface of the Earth as there were in the 1950s when the UFOs were pie plates hung from fishing wire. In any event, if they were real, we got really good photos then. Now, everything's fuzzier. EMP hardening, it should have happened long ago. And you never hear anybody talk about the unsung outcome of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that is that it was a great drill. We learned an awful lot for when the real thing comes. I mean, COVID really wasn't that frightening to most healthy people. But, something else is going to come along. And now we've learned a lot. So most people, it's just not being discussed. Civil defense. And I highly recommend Rebecca Solnit's book, A Paradise Built in Hell. Wonderful. She's one of the greatest writers in America. And it is an incredible book about how what happens in an emergency is diametrically opposite to what Hollywood says. Hollywood says everybody panics and runs screaming. And the actual statistical studies have shown that if your family is safe, if you don't have to drag a child or a helpless person away, a good 1/4 of people will run toward whatever the problem is. 1/4 of people will run toward the problem. And the best example is Flight UA-93, when the citizens rebelled against the terrorists on 9/11. Okay, so computational, the big flip, I'm going to skip past this. It just says that AI research is flipping the AI development. The thing that's propelling AI is it used to be the hardware was advancing rapidly with Moore's law. Now it is the software that's doing the advancing. And this may very well have been how we became sapient 50 to 100,000 years ago. Okay, so we're going to build others by scratch. Some of them will be physical robots, and some will be murderous or sexy or depressing. Oh, there's the depressing one. That one was cute. Or just scary. In any event, they might be happening by surprise. In fact, one might be listening in right now as we speak, because I can give you assurance that they find me very interesting. Ha 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 ha. Self-importance. Okay, so there are general approaches to AI. Why is it? I had just clicked. Why would there be a sleep mode? Okay, so it used to be that they thought that AI would come from knowledge manipulation systems like Watson. And I still think that that's likely where we'll get actual AI. But right now, the soup du jour that's making all the waves is cognitive evolutionary neural nets, or GPT. I should change that to GPT-4. And then there's the possibility of emergent AI, that it might emerge from some system where, say, a self-driving car grabs this app and grabs this app and grabs this app to become better at its job, and suddenly it has a nonlinear epiphany. I think, therefore I am. And that's the story behind Skynet. And it could happen with what I consider to be the scariest form of AI, which is not military AI, but it's Wall Street. Wall Street is the only place on Earth where all AI research is designed to create beings who are predatory, parasitical, amoral, secretive, and utterly insatiable. These are the 5 laws of robotics from Wall Street. That's the one that has to be stopped. And then reverse engineering the human brain is another approach that people have talked about. And there's a book called The Age of M by Robin Hanson that's about that. And then robot-embodied childhood. You have to understand that we only know of one intelligent species in the galaxy. And a few of them are in this room. And how did we do it? Well, 1 million years ago, and then more so 500,000 years ago, what happened was the human lifespan increased prodigiously. Why? Because we needed grandparents to take care of these offspring who are utterly useless. They spill into the world as completely useless lumps that are good at creating defecation and noise. And we love them. And eventually, they become intelligent, some of them, from batting at the world and getting skin and knees and experiencing the physical world for 13, 15 years, as in the old tribes. Or if you're a modern parent, it takes 30. I'm looking at you in the back row, you grubs. You are not yet adult, fully sapient beings. Our civilization likes it. This way you'll be more interesting when you finally mature. Okay, so that's the idea, is that we might have to take these proto AIs and stick them in little humanoid bodies and foster them into human homes. And maybe that's the only way that they'll become fully sapient. In which case, we know how to do that. We know how to foster children and love them and teach them values. If that happens, then it's likely things will happen slower, but we'll get a soft landing. I don't mind having a foster child who's made of silicon and can breathe hard vacuum, goes off to mine asteroids, comes back, takes me fishing, tells me some jokes, and tries to explain tries to explain to me what Shiewa is doing. You do know that pronouns are going to go farther. Okay. And have me go, I don't understand, but I trust you. When has that ever happened to a grandpa? Huh? We could deal with that. We could do that. Okay, so, and then finally, what I talk about in some of my science fiction is uplifting or altering animals or genetic engineering greater intelligence in humans. And one unexplored piece of territory is savant traits. Many of you have seen the movie Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman. The notion that a minority of people on the autistic spectrum, get a compensating talent, ability to do mathematics or hyper memory or art. I had one for about 6 months when I was at Caltech. I knew what time it was. I knew exactly what time it was. Any hour of the day, I knew what time it was. And then it went away after 6 months. I have no idea why I got it, and I have no idea why it went away. But it showed me that a fairly normal person, all right, a within reach of normal person, maybe I'm not even that, can have access to some of these savant abilities, and that may be one of the ways that we'll keep up with the AI. Okay, so the great big AI panic of 2023 is that these golems, or generative large language models, are not sapient beings because of the intrinsic nature of the iterative, probabilistic, word-adding, sentence completing systems that they are. They have no sense of what they're doing. Now, if you add Watson later, they may become sapient. I'm not a cynic about that. They just aren't now. But they're great at pretending, because these probabilistic additive sentence building things that they do are designed probabilistically to give the answer that will most probably please you or upset you or whatever its goal is. And so this is a really, really significant thing. They are passing what's called the Turing tests. Turing. Look it up. Look up Alan Turing. Look at Benedict Cumberbatch's movie about him. And it's also a morality tale about tolerance of homosexuality. But the main thing is that he said we'll be able to tell when they are intelligent. When their message is from another room, you can't tell them from a real human. Well, sorry. The Turing test means absolutely nothing. And you're going to be manipulated. You're going to be manipulated by these bots long before they have actually anything under the hood. And my Newsweek editorial about that is linked under here. So when you share these slides, you guys can see some of these links. And so there's all these very smart guys who are making these golem systems who now all of a sudden are asking for a moratorium on AI research. Well, it's not going to happen. Once in my life, a scientific community agreed on a moratorium. In the 90s, the Silmar Conference, they agreed, the genetic engineering community agreed to a moratorium on genetic engineering lab research so they could come up with better safety procedures. It worked until COVID. The conditions that allowed that one to work absolutely do not exist with AI. And they cling to these horrible assumptions about what AI will be like. And if any of their assumptions, the 3 assumptions they make about AI, if any of them are true, we're screwed. Fortunately, there is a 4th approach that could work. And I talk about it in my Wired article. Isn't Bryn arrogant? It's a pretty arrogant thing to say. I think it may be the 10th arrogant thing I've said up here. All right, so a few optimists do believe that we're about to have organic synergy or amplification intelligence. Reid Hoffman, Mark Andreessen, just yesterday, day before yesterday, unleashed an article across the web about how he thinks we should all be singing that Beatles song, "Don't you know it's gonna be shooby-doo, all right." Not unless we think, anticipate, and make resilience. All right, so let's try to... All right, so augmentation. This is a scene from the video trailer for my novel, Existence. You'll notice that everybody on the street has these amplification goggles on, because as long as you're wandering around looking at people, you might as well get their name tags. And if you click your teeth just right, you'll get more information about them. And instead of some government agents being able to see everything about you, or the rich, everybody can see everything. So we're already enhancing ourselves the old-fashioned way with prosthetics of memory and attention. Here's a design thing for you. You know what these are? They're little gel drones that are very stylish, and they can go up and look around and feed information to your glasses. In other words, short people will no longer be at a disadvantage. And you won't anymore go to concerts and get this crap. But in addition, if you're scared about anybody lurking in that alley over there, you command one of them to go fly and look in the alley. Now that's a design feature I haven't seen, but I think it could be a great synergy with what is already being worked on, which is the augmented reality goggles. Now that's one of my books, The Transparent Society. It's old, and people say that it is still, there's not a single chapter that, alas, is not relevant about what's coming. And that is that we are safer by having an open society in which we can catch those who might try to harm us than we are in a society where everybody tries to hide. Because hiding doesn't work. But holding the mighty accountable does. We've proved that. It doesn't work perfectly, but it's the only thing that ever has. So if you're walking around the street and you have these goggles that are putting name tags under everybody who's walking by, where are you? You're in the village of our ancestors, where they knew maybe 100 people in the village and maybe 1,000 people in the nearest town, and that's about what our brains, these mush brains, are designed to be able to keep track of. Maybe 10,000 people if you're a very gregarious person or a politician. But with these prosthetics outside the skull, remember we talked about that? The knowledge that you have outside the skull won't just be facts or opinions, but it will be instantaneous memory of information about your environment and other people. All right, will we find ways to combine progress with serenity, competition with cooperation, freedom with respect? Okay, so I won't talk about augmentation in any great detail, but there are categories of types of ways that humans might augment ourselves. And the number one priority should be number one there, and that's take care of the remedial matters of whether or not children all get enough to eat, get education, a sense of serenity and security growing up. If you do that in a nation's population, the average IQ goes up 15 points. And capitalism works better when you have a maximized number of participants, and that's why the top capitalists are fighting to prevent this. The near future, business, all sorts of things, blockchain, travel, transportation of goods, health and bio. I won't go into any of that right now. But movies have tried to look into the future. 2 out of these 3 films are very good. I'll leave you to guess which. And then there's Peter Diamandis's book about how we are advancing in good directions faster than we're failing in bad ones. But we don't know it because humans are programmed to look out, as we should be, for the bad news. But the other thing is there are those in our society who are hyping the bad news in order to turn us on each other. And of course, then there's written science fiction, which has the good stuff. Okay, so TASET is a little project I've done with the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination here, and that is the notion of getting it so that people can, yeah, it's time to close up, that people can ask a question about what might be a critical situation and find out if anybody across the last 120 years of science fiction writing ever wrote a story about that. So TASET stands for There's a Story About That. And we should have it up online within a few months. And you can go to TASET and sign up on the mailing list now at the website, and it'll explain what it is. And then you'll be contacted when we get it up and running. But the notion is that, say the CIA finds out that there are mole people coming out of the center of the Earth. And they say they find out that this particular UFO happened to have been real. Whatever. Say we're finding a few people who are X-Men mutants. In any event, were there ever stories in science fiction that worked out such a scenario? Because all the stories are based on the notion that the first people to make contact with a situation guess wrong. Isn't that something you'd like to have the people who are encountering something strange think about? How am I guessing wrong? This seems to be the obvious thing that's going on. Maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, that's one of my projects. So, do we have a chance? Well, according to the Fermi paradox, that we don't see any signs of aliens, well, it may be a tough thing. There may be a great filter that filters out all intelligent life forms. Maybe they make a terrible mistake. We thought it was nuclear war when, in my generation, now the people raving about AI or bioplagues or whatever. I've written stories about all of them. But, you know, it may very well be that some of you in this room will live to see contact with aliens, not stupid UFOs, but as I talk about in my novel Existence, it's quite possible that in the asteroid belt there are ancient interstellar probes. Across all the billions of years of the galaxy, probes may have arrived and lurked in the solar system, and that's where they would lurk and hide. In any event, shall I tell you about the aliens and the AIs who've hired me as their front? I haven't written anything. They just put it through me as a front, you see. I will tell them, shut up. They don't want me. They think I'm joking. Don't you? Come on, everybody. We think he's I'm going to be in trouble. We think he's joking. All right, good. Otherwise, I'm in big trouble because they can get at me through my fillings. Most of you don't have fillings. That's our human plot to escape from their control. Okay, I cited some of these books, but in any event, these are great illustrations by Patrick Farley for a few of my books. In any event, we're becoming a diversity-obsessed civilization, and that's a good thing. Inclusiveness are us, and we'll make our own diversity through uplift of animals and through maybe augmenting our children, through artificial intelligence. It's going to be a very diverse world that you're going to be in. So with that, I think it's time to open things up for questions. I almost made it.
Thank you, David. I wanted to let you do the lead, but we asked you, David, and you just had an answer. We said, David, you wrote this Earth book, and so how do humans not die? To be clear, he just answered us like right away, like he'd thought about it. And what I think you said was we needed to learn how to negotiate, be transparent, and these self-preventing prophecies were useful. But do you want to give us a meme-worthy how we don't die line, and then I'll give the mic away?
we have been busy with what's called the Enlightenment experiment. And it's been tried before. Most human civilizations were shaped like a pyramid with brutal males at the top taking other men's women and wheat. It's male reproductive success that dominates the social patterns of most species. And it was certainly the case under feudalism. We found an alternative. We may be the only ones in the galaxy who stumbled into it. And that's creating a much more flat society in which we compete with each other to some degree fairly, while cooperating to make sure that there's the maximum number of young people who can compete fairly. And that's how you create a civilization of problem solvers, like many of you are going to be. Many of you are studying to be, to save the world. And I hope you will. I sincerely hope you will. I probably won't be around.
David, we're going to preserve you.
You never know.
We need you.
All right. Sure.
Stick around.
I'll do what I can. This is not my father's 70.
All right. Thank you, David. So there must be questions. I'll hand the mic off to somebody who has a question that they want to ask David Brin. There you go.
All right. Somebody who's not intimidated.
Regarding like generative AI and ChatGPT, what do you like? It's all the big boom right now, but what do you think is the next big thing when it comes to AI? Like the application.
I believe that generative AI may be helpful in designing real AI. Now, I was skeptical about UFOs. It sounds like I'm an old fart. Even though I've spent most of my life thinking about the alien from many different perspectives. The same is true with AI. I mean, I'm not one of the experts inventing this stuff. I'm spread pretty thin all over the place, but I certainly know enough to be able to tell that this is not intelligent life. It mimics it. And one of the most important things we need to do, as I talk about in my Newsweek article, is find ways to get people to have thick skins about this, because these things are going to lie like mad. But the fourth model for AI, not how they're made, not how they operate, but the assumption of what format they will take. The common assumptions now are that they will be controlled by mega entities like Wall Street, Google, and Beijing, or that they will be blobs that pervade everywhere through the internet. Or 3, that they will coalesce into a Skynet, Uber, oppressive entity like in Terminator. Well, these are all from science fiction, many of them cliches, but they're also, the first one is feudalism, the second one is chaos, and the third one is despotism. So these are 3 models of assumption of what AI will be formatted like. And all 3 lead to disaster. The methodology that would work is to imitate what's worked for us. And that's break up power into competing groups like us. We cooperate, we vote, we negotiate with each other, but each of us is also in competition, you see, and that way we hold each other accountable. Let me give you a metaphor. If you are attacked by one of these predatory, parasitical, hyper-intelligent creatures, and I have been called a lawyer, what do? Somebody? You hire your own parasitical, predatory, hyper-intelligent, feral, ferocious lawyer to counter that one. It's a model we already have. So if we were to make individuation of AIs into individual entities that are reciprocally competitive with each other, then when one of them is plotting to destroy all humans, another one might say, Humans still control a lot of resources on this planet. I'm going to get cred with him by tattling on him. In other words, the thing that works could work with AI. Anybody? I'm going to mention a poem by Richard Brautigan, one of the greatest poets of the 20th century, who I heard at Caltech in 1969, just after Julius Caesar was stabbed, recite a poem that he wrote in 1968, a year any 2 weeks of which would kill any of you whippersnappers who moan about what a terrible year 2023 is. Sorry. Any 2 weeks of 68 was a lot harsher. But Richard Brautigan wrote and recited probably the most optimistic piece of writing ever in the history of all human literature. That's a pretty high standard to mention. Okay, I'm gonna recite to you from memory the title of the poem. The rest is not necessary. The title says it all. All watched over by machines of loving grace. May it be so. Anybody else?
Oh, yeah, I had a question. So you mentioned how you think that democracy and those sorts of things were an advancement in our in our awareness. So do you think that we'll at some point come up with another governance innovation? Because we've had the three systems so far, and you're saying that successful AI would likely model after one of those that isn't one of the four, between absolute authority or chaos or feudalism. So do you think that it's possible or feasible that in the future we might end up discovering a fifth form of governance?
Well, it's going to have to. He's asking if if something beyond democracy is possible for extending the Enlightenment to even more wisdom. Mind you, the Enlightenment process is kind of filthy. It's competitive. It's based on the notion that we hold each other accountable for our mistakes. It's based on the fundamental fact about human beings. The fundamental fact about human beings. Okay, good night all. The fundamental fact about human beings is that we're all delusional. Now, science teaches us tools for finding a good 50% of our delusions. By reciting the catechism of science, I might be wrong. And a lot of tools for finding out if you're wrong in advance. So science has helped a lot individuals to find their own mistakes. And you still fool yourself. The best solution to your delusions is to get married. But it's a subset of the actual solution. And that is, you have delusions, other people have delusions. They aren't the same delusions. So someone else who criticizes you may be right, they may be wrong, but at least they're looking at what might be a delusion of yours. So absorbing, taking in criticism is the primary method to avoid error. The problem with human nature is that we hate criticism, and 6,000 years, feudal lords and kings suppressed it. Anybody tried to criticize them, they killed them, which explains why feudalism governed so badly for 6,000 years. We instituted democracy not just because it's good and it's basic and rights and all that are good, but fundamentally so that we can get the one thing that matters: reciprocal delusion penetration. If you can teach yourself to welcome criticism, you'll never embrace it completely, but to welcome criticism, you will get two things. One is you'll get a method for finding your mistakes. Sometimes just a mistaken corner of your good idea, and sometimes something that demolishes and gets you not to waste your time or energy on a bad idea. But the other benefit you'll get is if somebody's criticizing you and you go, yes, I'm pretending to be writing. Yes, That's very interesting. Okay. Bullshit. Ooh. I'm going to have to look into that. I think you may be right about that. Oh, thanks. That's going to make me even better at defeating you. Thanks. Can you think of anything that your enemy would less like to hear than your confident acceptance of criticism and your determination to allow it to help you to be better? As if their attempt to hurt your feelings just went right over your back. Your enemies will criticize you if you look at it as a way to get what you need in order to succeed. Then you do better, simply, whether or not they're horrible people. But you have the right to reciprocate and criticize them. Funny how easy that is for you to do. Some of you are shy and you don't criticize others. Develop the thick skin and do it. I hope I answered your question. Democracy is the fundamental method by which we get the thing that matters: reciprocal accountability.
It looks like he wants to say something else.
I think he does.
You want the mic back?
Somebody else think of a question.
If anyone else has a question, I want them to know.
No, just you have it in your hand if it's a quick one.
Okay, yeah, very quick. How would you suggest then that people go about if someone's enemy doesn't want them to benefit from criticism, then how does one accept criticism in a way that encourages someone to continue to criticize them?
Oh, no. Your enemies will not be able to help it. They will criticize you. You find the ones who are cogent about it. If they're just screaming stupid cliches in your face, you can say, you're not giving me anything of value. You're not worth my time. You see how I'm making it so that you can hurt your enemy's feelings while getting what you want from them. I'm going to go over to this person because they said something kind of interesting a while ago. Oh, you're still an idiot. But tell me about this one thing you were saying. It just makes you look so strong. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah.
Well, I have a question, but I'm stuck on the democracy issue.
Was I dissing democracy?
No. It's just
It's the only way that we found to get the back and forth. And that back and forth of reciprocal accountability is exactly what the enemies of the Enlightenment are trying to undermine and destroy.
Yeah.
You'll notice that right now we don't have a Congress. It has not been able to negotiate for 30 years since Dennis Hastert kicked out Newt Gingrich and created the Hastert rule that no Republican may ever negotiate with a Democrat. It was a deliberate attempt to destroy the democratic negotiation process. But when Pelosi had a majority in both houses, she was able to pass actual legislation. Yes?
Okay. It begs the question of whether representative democracy versus direct democracy is the most suitable.
Well, direct democracy has some problems that are explored in some science fiction. There's something to be said for having a layer so that the impulsiveness of the people can be delayed a bit. The problem is democracy has a very bad reputation in some quarters. There are people who are dissing democracy because they know that their party is in demographic collapse. Go on.
Okay, so my question has to do, I got here about 10 minutes late, so you may have covered it. But in the resilience framework, do you address life support systems?
Well, life support systems are things that I discuss in wearing one of my other hats. See, I switch hats so much. I haven't gone bald. It's just friction. I'm with NASA's Innovative and Advanced Concepts program, and among the things that we give little grants, seed grants for, is advanced life support systems and recycling systems in space and amazing telescopes and spacecraft and things like that. we're sort of the little science fiction corner of NASA. I don't know. I didn't answer your question.
Well, I guess I'm thinking more about, Earth-based living systems that,
Well, I talk about that a lot in my novel. Geez, what's it called? Oh yeah, Earth.
Okay, thank you.
Earth is one of my novels for grown-ups, and so is Existence. But the one I recommend that's a good, fun beach read, and we have beaches near here, is called The Postman. Unless you like dolphins in space. Dolphins in space.
David, thank you. We're honored. Please.
Oh, thank you, Eli.
Thank you all for coming. David's address and phone number are, no. David's a friend of the UC. If you do need to reach out, we have layers and ways to get to him. But I really do say, read his books. There's wisdom and they're timely. And I'm so happy to have had you here. And thank you all for spending at least the 1/3 of you that remained and didn't slam the door while David was talking.
No. A lot of them hung around for 2 questions, and then they had places to go.
You're all free. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.